My aunt, Mary Betton, I must tell you, died by a fall from her horse when she was riding out to take the air in Bombay. The news of my legacy reached me one night about the same time that the act was passed that gave votes to women. A solicitor's letter fell into the post box, and when I opened it, I found that she had left me £500 a year forever. Of the two, the vote and the money I own seemed infinitely the more important. Before that, I had made my living by cadging odd jobs from newspapers, by reporting a donkey show here or a wedding there. I had earned a few pounds by addressing envelopes, reading to old ladies, making artificial flowers, teaching the alphabet to small children in a kindergarten. Such were the chief occupations that were open to women before 1918. I need not, I am afraid, describe in any detail the harshness of the work, the hardness of the work, for you know perhaps women who have done it, nor the difficulty of living on the money when it was earned, for you may have tried. But what still remains with me is a worse infliction than either was the poison of fear and bitterness. But what still remains with me as a worse infliction than either was the poison of fear and bitterness, which those days bred in me. To begin with, always to be doing work that one did not wish to do, and to do it like a slave, flattering and fawning. Not always necessarily, perhaps, but it seemed necessary, and the stakes were too great to run risks. And then the thought of that one gift which it was death to hide, a small one but dear to the possessor, perishing, and with it myself, my soul, all this became like a rust eating away the bloom of the spring, destroying the tree at its heart. However, as I say, my aunt died, and whenever I change a 10-shilling note, a little of that rust and corrosion is rubbed off. Fear and bitterness go. Indeed, I thought, slipping the silver into my purse. It is remarkable, remembering the bitterness of those days, what a change of temper a fixed income will bring about. No force in the world can take from me my £500. Food, house, and clothing are mine forever. Therefore, not merely do effort and labor cease, but also hatred and bitterness. I need not hate any man, he cannot hurt me. I need not flatter any man, he has nothing to give me. So imperceptibly I found myself adopting a new attitude towards the other half of the human race. It was absurd to blame any class or any sex as a whole. Great bodies of people are never responsible for what they do. They are driven by instincts which are not within their control. They too, the patriarchs, the professors, had endless difficulties, terrible drawbacks to contend with. Their education had been in some ways as faulty as my own. It had bred in them defects as great. True, they had money and power, but only at the cost of harboring in their breasts an eagle, a vulture, forever tearing the liver out and plucking at the lungs. The instinct for possession, the rage for acquisition, which drives them to desire other people's fields and goods perpetually, to make frontiers and flags, battleships and poison gas, to offer up their own lives and their children's lives. Walk through the Admiralty Arch, I had reached that monument, or any other avenue given up to trophies and cannon, and reflect upon the kind of glory celebrated there. Or watch in the spring sunshine the stockbroker and the great barrister going indoors to make money and more money and more money, when it is a fact that £500 a year will keep one alive in the sunshine. These are unpleasant instincts to harbor, I reflected. They are bred of the conditions of life, of the lack of civilization, I thought, looking at the statue of the Duke of Cambridge, and in particular at the feathers in his cocked hat, with a fixity that they have scarcely ever received before. And as I realized these drawbacks, by degrees fear and bitterness modified themselves into pity and toleration. And then in a year or two, pity and toleration went, and the greatest release of all came, which is freedom to think of things in themselves. That building, for example, do I like it or not? Is that picture beautiful or not? Is that, in my opinion, a good book or a bad? Indeed, my aunt's legacy unveiled the sky to me and substituted for the large and imposing figure of a gentleman, which Milton recommended for my perpetual adoration, a view of the open sky. So thinking, so speculating, I found my way back to my house by the river. Lamps were being lit, and an indescribable change had come over London since the morning hour. It was as if the great machine, after laboring all day, had made with our help a few yards of something very exciting and beautiful, a fiery fabric flashing with red eyes, a tawny monster, roaring with hot breath. Even the wind seemed flung like a flag as it lashed the houses and rattled the hoardings. I'm going to reread that. It didn't really set in my mind. So thinking, so speculating, I found my way back to my house by the river. Lamps were being lit, and an indescribable change had come over London since the morning hour. It was as if the great machine, after laboring all day, had made with our help a few yards of something very exciting and beautiful, a fiery fabric flashing with red eyes, a tawny monster roaring with hot breath. Even the wind seemed flung like a flag as it lashed the houses and rattled the hoardings. In my little street, however, domesticity prevailed. The house painter was descending his ladder. The nursemaid was wheeling the perambulator carefully in and out back to nursery tea. The coal heaver was folding his empty sacks on top of each other. The woman who keeps the greengrocer's shop was adding up the day's takings with her hands in red mittens. But so engrossed was I with the problem you have laid upon my shoulders that I could not see even these usual sights without referring them to one center. I thought how much harder it is now than it must have been even a century ago to say which of these employments is the higher, the more necessary. Is it better to be a coal heaver or a nursemaid? Is the charwoman who has brought up 8 children of less value to the world than the barrister who has made £100,000? It is useless to ask such questions, for nobody can answer them. Not only do the comparative values of charwomen and lawyers rise and fall from decade to decade, but we have no rods with which to measure them even as they are at the moment. I had been foolish to ask my professor to furnish me with indisputable proofs of this or that in his argument about women. Even if one could state the value of any one gift at the moment, those values will change. In a century's time, very possibly, they will have changed completely. Moreover, in 100 years, I thought, reaching my own doorstep, women will have ceased to be the protected sex. Logically, they will take part in all the activities and exertions that were once denied them. The nursemaid will heave coal. The shopwoman will drive an engine. All assumptions founded on the facts observed when women were the protected sex will have disappeared, as, for example, here a squad of soldiers march down the street, that women, clergymen, and gardeners live longer than other people. Remove that protection, expose them to the same exertions and activities, make them soldiers and sailors and engine drivers and dock laborers. And will not women die off so much younger, so much quicker than men that one will say, I saw a woman today, as one used to say, I saw an aeroplane. Anything may happen when womanhood has ceased to be a protected occupation. I thought, opening the door, but what bearing has all this upon the subject of my paper, Women in Fiction? I asked, going indoors. Chapter 3. It was disappointing not to have brought back in the evening some important statement, some authentic fact. Women are poorer than men because this or that. Perhaps now it would be better to give up seeking for the truth and receiving on one's head an avalanche of opinion, hot as lava, discolored as dishwater. It would be better to draw the curtains, to shut out distractions, to light the lamp, to narrow the inquiry, and to ask the historian who records not opinions but facts, to describe under what conditions women lived, not throughout the ages, but in England, say in the time of Elizabeth. For it is a perennial puzzle why no woman wrote a word of that extraordinary literature when every other man, it seemed, was capable of song or sonnet. What were the conditions in which women lived, I asked myself, for fiction, imaginative work, that is not dropped like a pebble upon the ground, as science may be. Fiction is like a spider's web, attached ever so lightly perhaps, but still attached to life at all 4 corners. Often the attachment is scarcely perceptible. Shakespeare's plays, for instance, seem to hang there complete by themselves. but when the web is pulled askew, hooked up at the edge, torn in the middle, one remembers that these webs are not spun in midair by incorporeal creatures, but are the work of suffering human beings and are attached to grossly material things, like health and money and the houses we live in. I went, therefore, to the shelf where the histories stand and took down one of the latest, Professor Trevelyan's History of England. Once more I looked up women, found, quote, position of, end of quote, and turned to the pages indicated, quote, wife beating, end of quote. I read, quote, was a recognized right of man and was practiced without shame by high as well as low. Similarly, end of quote, the historian goes on, quote, the daughter who refused to marry the gentleman of her parents' choice was liable to be locked up, beaten and flung about the room without any shock being inflicted on public opinion. Marriage was not an affair of personal affection, but of family avarice, particularly in the chivalrous upper classes. Betrothal often took place while one or both of the parties was in the cradle, and marriage when they were scarcely out of the nurse's charge. End of quote. That was about 1470, soon after Chaucer's time. The next reference to the position of women is some 200 years later, in the time of the Stuarts. Quote, it was still the exception for women of the upper and middle class to choose their own husbands. And when the husband had been assigned, he was lord and master, so far at least as law and custom could make him. Yet even so, end of quote, Professor Trevelyan concludes, quote, neither Shakespeare's women nor those of authentic 17th century memoirs like the Verneys and the Hutchinsons seem wanting in personality and character. End of quote. Certainly, if we consider it, Cleopatra must have had a way with her. Lady Macbeth, one would suppose, had a will of her own. Rosalind, one might conclude, was an attractive girl. Professor Trevelyan is speaking no more than the truth when he remarks that Shakespeare's women do not seem wanting in personality and character. Not being a historian, one might go even further and say that women have burnt like beacons in all the works of all the poets from the beginning of time. Clytemnestra, Antigone, Cleopatra, Lady Macbeth, Phaedra, Cressida, Rosalind, Desdemona, the Duchess of Malfi. Among the dramatists, then among the prose writers, Millamant, Clarissa, Becky Sharp, Anna Karenina, Emma Bovary, Madame de Guermantes. The names flock to mind, nor do they recall women, quote, lacking in personality and character, end of quote. Indeed, if woman had no existence save in the fiction written by men, one would imagine her a person of the utmost importance, very various, heroic and mean, splendid and sordid, infinitely beautiful and hideous in the extreme, as great as a man, some think even greater. Quote, it remains a strange and almost inexplicable fact that in Athena's city, where women were kept in almost oriental suppression as odalisques or drudges, the stage should yet have produced figures like Clytemnestra and Cassandra, Atossa and Antigone, Phaedra and Medea, and all the other heroines who dominate play after play of the misogynist Euripides. But the paradox of this world where in real life a respectable woman could hardly show her face alone in the street, and yet on the stage woman equals or surpasses man, has never been satisfactorily explained. In modern tragedy, the same predominance exists. At all events, a very cursory survey of Shakespeare's work, similarly with Webster, though not with Marlowe or Johnson, suffices to reveal how this dominance, this initiative of women, persists from Rosalind to Lady Macbeth. So too in Racine, 6 of his tragedies bear their heroines' names. And what male characters of this shall we set against Hermione and Andromache, Berenice and Roxanne, Phaedra and Athalie, So again with Ibsen, what men shall we match with Solveig and Nora, Hedda and Hilda Wangel, and Rebecca West, end of quote. F.L. Lucas.